Please welcome political scientist and researcher, Dr. Simon Maghakyan, to the stage.
I took this photograph in 2021, just months after the end of the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war. Fleeing Armenians, having no choice, had taken a medieval khachkar with them to safekeeping, practicing victim agency, not of just rights, but of responsibilities. Disturbing a sacred Darivan khachkar to save it. But what of the monuments that have stayed behind? This was one of the 2020 APA photos of the year. A man from Shushi praying in Razanchetsot after Azerbaijan's double strikes. For over a century, this cathedral had been the scene of violence, yet it survived even after the 1920 pogrom of Shushi, during which its iconic dome was destroyed. On October the 8th, 2020, Azerbaijan bombed it twice, opening a wound with further heartbreak and insult. Then, under a so-called renovation, it was beheaded, a renovation that ended last year. And the question today is, what is the agency of the most important stakeholders of this land, of this sacred space? My own research has been about the Nakhichevan region, where the entire Armenian historical landscape was destroyed between 1997 and 2006. Exactly 10 years after no Armenians were allowed to visit, no Armenian monuments were left on the soil. There are examples, though, from Turkey and Iran of how Armenians have been able to claim agency. At the Iranian-Azerbaijani border is Julfa, which I visited 10 years ago and saw literally nothing left of what once was the world's largest medieval Armenian cemetery. Just miles away in the town of Agulis, a thriving Armenian community of merchants who blended harmony of medieval traditions and European traditions. A community that was massacred during the Armenian genocide, leaving behind magnificent churches that were also destroyed between 1997 and 2006, when my satellite investigation in the art newspaper showed the complete disappearance. Azerbaijan's ambassador said that the monuments were not destroyed because they never existed to begin with. Non-existing sites or cemeteries, they said, cannot be destroyed. This was self-incrimination because this became a major evidence at the International Court of Justice that gave a provisional order of ensuring that Azerbaijan does not destroy Armenian monuments, something that Azerbaijan has violated. I also went back that year to Urfa, my ancestral hometown, to see the magnificent cathedral that in 1994 was turned into a mosque. A scene of heartbreak, yet better than the flat remains of Julfa, because at least I had a chance to pray there during Ramadan. And better than the scenes of Van, where nothing remains from the old city. There's 3 examples throughout Turkey that show Armenian agency. One is Ahtamar, perhaps the most beautiful Armenian architectural monument. It survived thanks to Yashar Kemal, a Kurdish Turkish author who in 1951 ensured that its ongoing destruction would stop. It was renovated for political purposes by Erdogan at a time when that was the much more politically convenient thing to do. But what Armenian pilgrims have done since the renovation is teaching locals the history, including the correct spelling of Akhtamash. Not too far, at Varagavang, nothing except a small portion remains of the 7 magnificent churches of this monastic complex. And it's because of Armenian tourists and Armenian tour guide leaders and local Kurds that at least whatever has remained is conserved, including with the participation of this family. Not too far, but a few hours of drive away, is St. Giragos in Diyarbakir, which many of us know has been renovated, not just once, but a few times in the last 2 years. It's a place that has brought out local Islamized Armenians to reclaim their heritage. And a photograph I captured during my visit of Ani Hovhannisyan's documentary, speaking to local Armenians, capturing the rerooting of the area with the participation of Armenian diasporans, participation of specialists in the local community. The same was not allowed in Nakhichevan, where Argam Ayvazian, who documented about 28,000 monuments, was not allowed to return after 1987. And not only because he was a researcher, because he was Armenian, just like Lusik Aguletsi, the last Armenian of Nakhichevan, who was also not allowed to return. And so the priests of Darivang, as they were leaving, the last thing they did last year was to pray for return. Here is a better shot of the Khachkars that I photographed after the 2020 war. We know that the monuments that are behind are not safe, that there is destruction going on. And we also know that Azerbaijanis point out that there was damage and destruction under Armenian control. But we know how systematic Azerbaijan's erasure of Armenian heritage is. We know how racist it is, calling Armenians a cancerous tumor, calling the final cleansing a celebration, and saying that there will be no traces of Armenians left. We also know how much Armenians and everyone loves their heritage. We know that Armenians and Azerbaijanis of 2 ordinary villages have done something extraordinary in the 1980s, swapping villages and keeping the promise of preserving each other's graves. We can also look at maybe some similarities between Armenian and Islamic heritage in the region, but that at the time is false hope, because we know that Azerbaijan is not looking for commonalities, because if it did, by proclaiming Armenian monuments Caucasian Albanian like it has done in Nakhichevan and in Artsakh, it would preserve them. Yet that very proclamation did not save the Armenian, or according to Azerbaijan, the Albanian monuments of Nakhichevan. And we saw instead the heartbreak of the destruction of the world's largest medieval Armenian cemetery. So what can be done when we see images like this? When we look at satellites, when we read the news, when we know that the destruction is also continuing in Turkey, when we know that when Ani was attacked in the 13th century, when Armenians had a chance to take revenge in Ardabil, and here are the generals who built a church in Armenia, that they burned down a mosque, not just for the revenge of the past year's atrocities, but for a destruction that had happened 500 years earlier, trauma that stays on. We know that Armenians had overcome this trauma in Iran, where St. Tadej is a site of major pilgrimage. We know that the right of return is looking increasingly impossible, given that Azerbaijan is destroying Armenian homes in Stepanakert. But we know that religious leaders can, should, and have to speak as they have done, not just the last 2 years, even though one of them, the Sheikh ul-Islam of Azerbaijan, as I exposed in the Wall Street Journal, had a mosque built in honor of him over a destroyed Armenian church. We know that this has happened 100 years ago when enemies came together because they loved their communities more than they hated each other. And we know that Armenians in Urfa have done something incredible. The reason why I was able to go back and pray, even if it was a mosque, was because of my ancestors my community there, that came together after 3,000 Armenians were burned in this cathedral in 1895. With their bare hands, they cleaned up the entire church of the remains of their loved ones, not just for themselves, not just for their ancestors, so that people like me could go back and pray, even if during Ramadan. The monuments make our lives meaningful, but the monuments need us as much as we need them. And as the donation box at Giragos notes, Armenians not only have rights, but responsibilities. This restoration, it says, has been made possible with your donations. In memories of our roots, living in this land since thousands of years, do not forget it. Do not forget it. Thank you.